Good afternoon. This is Catherine Clement in Boulder, Colorado, and we're here for the weekly wellness Zoom. And I'm getting a little bit of feedback. If you can mute for me there, Amber, I'd appreciate it. And we're here with Amber Rose today, and thank you. And she was with us last week, and we had such an amazing conversation that we wanted to continue it, but we didn't want to rob you guys of it. It's a wonder. So we decided to come back for part B, the EE, on this, and we're going to talk about well, whatever comes up, but I do know we're going to talk about pain and we're going to talk about MS, because those are two really important. There's a lot of people in chronic pain for a multitude of reasons. And some people with MS have pain and some people don't. Like I have a friend that doesn't have any pain, but she has other things, like I forget what they call them, intentional, anyway, tremors, intentional tremors, I think they're called. And she, if bees could help her, how amazing would that be? So in speaking with Amber last week, we realized that she has worked with people that have MS. So I wanted to hear about her experiences and just learn more about this wonderful therapy. And hopefully our intent is that these videos will go out and someone will see them and try this therapy and get amazing results and come tell us about it. That's our intent. So I'm going to mute now and I'll have you come out, Amber Rose. Thank you so much for joining me again today.
Well, I'm so glad to be here. And today we're actually going to do some magic tricks. And what I mean by that is like we're going to pull a rabbit out of a hat, so to speak. But first we have to put the hat there. Then we have to put the rabbit in the hat, and then we get to pull it out. So that's sort of the philosophy that we're going to start with, that I have some tricks up my sleeve that you might not have heard about. But it took me 23 years to get here, to be on this webinar, Zoomcast today. So just because I have all these tools doesn't mean I just found them yesterday. So the good news is that I've been doing this work for over 23 years, and so I have a lot of experience. I've treated over 60,000 patients, and my first 4 to 5 years in my free clinic, and I did say free, I ran a free clinic, I've never charged for bees, and that's the way I was trained. So I'm just following my mentor's lead. And the first 4 to 5 years was mostly MS patients and people with chronic pain. And as you said, they don't always go together, but those seem to be the people that were coming forward, because there was a big article written up about bee sting therapy or bee venom therapy in MS. And so eventually I inherited, after 2 weeks of just learning from someone, she was feeling a little bit burnt out. So she asked if I would take over. I said, "Oh, you mean come to your house and do it there?" She said, "No, at your house." So as I said last time, for those who maybe didn't see the first presentation, I didn't have anything I needed. I didn't have any bees. I didn't have a ramp, handicapped accessible ramp. I didn't have tweezers. I didn't have the tools that I needed. And so I had asked for a sign, and I got the sign about doing the bees when I read the article. And then I asked for a second sign, like, how was I going to, I needed help from the universe to, whether you want to call it God or the universe, I just needed people to step forward and help me. And so within a couple of weeks, I did have the free clinic up and running, and I think on the first day we had 50 people there. Yeah, 50 people on the very, very first day. And then it just kept increasing. So I made a little list here because I'm a perfectionist, so I don't want to forget anything like really important. So I made a list of some things I didn't cover last time. And so I just want to sort of wax philosophical at the beginning, just so people can, like, if they want to get a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, or, they just want to be listening and not having to take notes. We can make sure that you get everything. So don't feel like you have to rush and take notes. So I want to put everybody at ease. What we're going to do, since we're looking at MS and chronic pain, and basically we're really looking at anything that's chronic. I mean, if somebody just fell on a ski slope and broke their leg, I wouldn't be stinging them with bees. It's just too soon, like let the body try to have a chance to heal itself. But, after about 6 weeks, most people think it's chronic, although it depends on who you're talking to, what really qualifies as chronic. But most of the people coming to me were in wheelchairs or scooters, or crawling on their hands and knees, into my house. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a medicine out of the illness itself. So Catherine and I like to talk about seeing if there's a problem somewhere and finding a solution. So in this story that we're going to talk about, the solution is honeybees, the venom from honeybees. Now, honeybees, there are a lot of honeybee products like propolis, pollen, royal jelly, honey, but even beeswax, for candles and everything. But what we're going to focus on today really is the venom, which is actually, I think, the most powerful of all the honeybee products. So it's like bringing out the big guns. Although I'm a non-violent person, but as a metaphor. And if you think about it, it's like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. We're all Dorothys and Totos. We're all trying to find our way home again to a time and a place before we were knocked off balance. So if someone fell off a horse, they might want to go back to a time and a place where before they fell off that horse. They might have done something differently. Or, with me, I slipped on the ice, or I lifted my mother off the floor and broke my spine, and then I was in a car accident, broke my spine again. So, when you have a chronic ailment, no matter what it is, you always want to go back to yesterday, like the Beatles song, all my troubles seem so far away, because you want to go back to a time and a place when everything was really okay, or you felt like, you didn't have those symptoms that are bothering you now. But let's say if you won the lottery, you might not want to go back to yesterday, because maybe the lottery might help you fix a number of your problems. But not that many people win the lottery, so to speak. So we have to kind of live where we are, be where our feet are, be in the moment today. And in the moment, people who are watching this, maybe either have MS, have a chronic illness, or have some kind of chronic pain. So in a sense, what we're doing by making a medicine out of the illness itself, boy, that I could do a whole lecture just on that one sentence, But what we're doing is we're flipping the coin, flipping something. Everything has a possibility of turning into its opposite. So wherever there is a problem, there's always a solution. We may not see it yet. We may not have heard about it yet, but there is a solution out there. And today, the solution we're going to be talking about is Bee Venon Therapy. So honeybees are, like going back to the Wizard of Oz, Dorothy just wants to get home with Toto, and she meets friends along the way. And so here we are friends along the way, trying to find our way home. And all she had to do was click the heels of her ruby red slippers. And all of a sudden, she woke up and she was home. So our ruby red slippers are the honeybees, God's little doctors. That's how I feel. So that's what I mean about taking the very thing that's at the heart of your pain, the heart of your ailment, the heart of your struggle, and flipping it and turning it into the opposite. So we're going to make a medicine out of the very thing that's bothering us. So one of the things we have to do is find a way to be at peace and to befriend our symptoms. I know that's very difficult when you're in pain or you're struggling, and let's say with MS, maybe you can't walk to the bathroom, or you can't feed yourself, or you're blind, or something like that, because MS has a number of different manifestations. Someone in pain is saying, how do I befriend my pain? It's like, but what we resist persists. So we have to find a way to make peace with some of those symptoms, all of them if we can. Actually, the truth is that even if you can't make peace and befriend your symptoms, the bees will help you do it, because the symptoms will just disappear. And you'll be very shocked that all of a sudden a big scar that you had from surgery is now gone. It's like, so I recommend if people have had surgery that they take pictures before they ever start bee stings, and then take pictures. You don't necessarily have to show them to one another, but for yourself, so you can see your own progress, and maybe even keep a journal, because it's very easy to forget. When you start feeling better, you forget some of the symptoms you had before, and then you might say, well, gee, the bees aren't really working. And then when you look back at your journal, you say, well, gee, those 10 symptoms that I had at the beginning, I only have 5 right now, and I'm in month 1 or 2 of stinging myself. So sometimes we forget, we forget where we were when we started. So it's always good to keep a journal, whether you're going through a divorce and it has nothing to do with the bees. Journaling is just a wonderful tool. So I have many, many journals that have kept me they've been like my best friend for a long time. So, when you're alone, sometimes the journal can become your best friend. Okay, so one of the things we want to do is, let's say somebody has fallen, or they've injured themselves in some way, or they have symptoms that they can't stand and they hate, and they're getting sick and tired of being sick and tired of those symptoms. We want, part of befriending is kissing the boo-boo. Now, when we were little kids, and let's say we fell off our bike or fell on the sidewalk and scraped our knee, if we had a mom or a grandma or an aunt who was there, or a babysitter or something, they said, oh, let me kiss the boo-boo. Well, I don't think it was the saliva that magically, healed it. I think it was the love. And so I just want to emphasize that the word venom, because we're going to be using bee venom, comes from the word Venus. It's Latin, comes from the Latin root of Venus, which is the goddess of love. Venus was the goddess of love. So we are kissing the boo-boo. So you may not totally enjoy being stung by a honeybee, might not be your first choice of what you'd like to do, because it is a hot, spicy burn. But you can use ice to sort of numb the area first, like they might do if you're getting a tooth extracted. They might use Novocaine or something like that. So we use ice as a way of sort of numbing the area that we're going to sting. And it's sort of, then you can use ice while the stinger's still in there. And after the stinger comes out, you can use ice. You can continue to use it until you feel like you don't need it anymore. So, okay. So we're befriending our symptoms, we're kissing the boo-boo, and we're going to wave a magic wand. And I know it sounds too good to be true, but, I've had people crawl into my house and walk out. I've had people who were blind who can now see. I've had people who've been in agony be pain-free, or people who couldn't feed themselves or couldn't walk, and to be able to, what some people take for granted, like let's say you're watching television or listening to the radio, to be able to turn the channels on your radio to change the station. I mean, some people with MS don't have that ability with their dexterity with their fingers to be able to turn the dial. And so I've had, a lot of miracle stories around the ability to use parts of your body that you weren't able to use before. And there are even stories, a lot of people with MS have issues with their bladder. They have lost some of their bladder control. And so very often they have a catheter in. And I have a story about a particular man that I'm just going to mention now before I forget. His name is Lonnie, and he was one of my patients with MS. He was in a wheelchair when he first came to me. And so there's more to the story, because when he first came, he was in a wheelchair and he couldn't eat by himself. He had to be fed. He was living in a nursing home at age 38. And basically his family and friends and everybody just sort of gave up on him, and he was put into a nursing home with a bunch of elderly people, and he stuck out like a sore thumb. But he had a catheter in. Eventually, he was able to feed himself. He could even use chopsticks and have Chinese food, which was a really big deal. Change the stations on his radio. But besides being able to walk, he really wanted that catheter out. He really wanted it out. And the nurses and the orderlies at the nursing home didn't believe that he could control his bladder and either use a bedpan or eventually get to the bathroom. And so for a man to pull out his own catheter is a very painful thing to do. But he did it because he wanted to prove to them that he had the ability to control his bladder. Then they believed him, but until he pulled it out. So sometimes you really have to do bold things, like sting yourself with honeybees is a pretty bold thing to begin with. But, most people who are desperate will grab at straws. This particular straw has gold, is made of gold, really. It's like Rumpelstiltskin taking straw and turning it into gold. I mean, you could take all the fairy tales in the world that you want. I can't promise you'll live happily ever after, but I can say that your quality of life will have been improved, I mean, you may feel that you lost a lot of your life. A lot of my patients say, I feel like I lost 15 years of my life. I can't get that back. Well, okay, some things, we have to accept some things that we cannot change. But now that you have a good quality of life, now you can begin to live that life, the life that you always wanted, So that to me is a miracle. So that's like pulling the rabbit out of the hat and waving the magic wand. But again, remember that all the stories that I tell are based on experience. It may be anecdotal experience, okay? It may not be something that where they did a double-blind study doing it, because all the double-blind studies, are basically using injectable venom. Or maybe they're doing it on, rats or something like that. But what I'm talking about is real people. So I know what this looks like for real people. There was one woman who came to me. She was in a wheelchair. She came all the way down from, I think, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I was living in Maryland. And I don't normally sting the neck area early on, but I wanted to show her husband how to sting her because she was only going to be there one day. And she just come back from the eye doctor, and she brought with her her scans that she had absolutely no light was coming into her eyes at all, into the optic nerve. It was totally, I used to have copies, I'm not sure where they are right now, but of like her results of her exam. Anyway, so we thought we had nothing to lose by trying, so we weren't going to start getting her out of the wheelchair because that would have taken a while. But I thought, I'll just show him how to focus on the eyes because that would make a real difference in her quality of life. So we worked on the first cervical, like up by, the hairline at the top of the neck where the hair kind of meets your neck, where the head kind of sits on top of the occiput there. And fancy words I'm using, but basically where your hairline is, in that area. And I normally don't start there. But for her, she was only coming one time, and I wanted to show him where to sting. And I did a testing first to make sure she wasn't allergic, and I had my EpiPen with me and everything. And then they went home with a jar of bees, So he stung her 2 days later, about in the same area. As long as it's not red, you can sting this same area. If it's still red, I suggest you just move around a little bit. So, if it's still red, it means there's still a venom there. So there's no point in stinging where there's already venom. You might want to just move an inch over. And so he did 2 stings 2 days later because we don't sting every day. So we usually do like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, something like that, and then take the weekend off. And so he stung her, those 2 stings, and the very next day was Christmas Day. And I think it was 1995. I think this story took place in 1995. Pretty sure. And I got a call from them. What was she doing? She was baking Christmas cookies because she wasn't blind anymore. She could see. Now that's only, that's a rare case when just 2 sessions, but in the right location. We didn't sting like right by her eye. I felt like that would be really, too strong to start off that way. And every Christmas I call them to make sure, and she's never lost her sight since. Yeah. So these are just some of the stories. And those 2 stories, the Lonnie story with pulling his own catheter out, and this woman who is blind, were both MS stories. Okay? So we have 2 MS patients that we're discussing. And about what we used to say in the old days was that this Bee Venom Therapy was a treatment, not a cure. I never used the C word, cure, because, nothing is, you never know what could be happening for someone. And even as an acupuncturist, I was taught never to use the word cure. So when I see people advertising not so much in the yellow pages anymore, but let's say on a website, that they can cure infertility, and then a whole list of 20 things, allergies, back pain, but they use the word cure with acupuncture now. I'm talking about. It's like, I kind of cringe because we're really not supposed to make those kind of promises. Even with Western medicine, they can't promise that something is a cure or that the patient won't die if they're in surgery. Things happen, so I never use the word cure. But I was trained that Bee Venom Therapy was a treatment, not a cure for MS, a treatment. And that you needed to give it at least 6 months, 6 to 9 months, to even decide if you wanted to continue. So if you were just 1 or 2 months in and not noticing any results, I would just say, but it's too early. You have to wait at least 6 months before you notice any changes. Now, some people notice changes quickly, but those are more the exception. What I've discovered, and seems almost counterintuitive, that people who've been sick the longest seem to get well the fastest. So I don't know. Maybe that's just MS, but my experience with MS is that often the longer someone's had MS, the more their body soaks up the bee venom like a sponge, and they just love it. The body's loving it. And we'll get in a minute to why the body's loving it so much. But going back to Lonnie, in his 6th month, he was very happy with his progress, but he still, he was controlling his bladder and he could still feed himself. But he wasn't walking yet out of his wheelchair. So I said, well, I would recommend that you give it at least, a few more months. Well, in his 7th month, he said to me, I want you, he was being driven to my house by the Red Cross van. The Red Cross picked him up at the nursing home and drove him to my house. And they had all kinds of handicapped taxis and things like that too, that would be pulling up in front of my house. And then they come back and pick them all up at the end of the 2 or 3 hours visit. So, and it was kind of a community experience. So even though I brought people into my dining room, we had like a little, like a shade where some people could get some privacy, because let's say if you're going to do bladder stings and you're stinging in the pubic hair, you don't necessarily want 35 people in the living room to be, looking at you while you're doing it. So we had like a screen up that gave people a little privacy. And I had 2 volunteers that were helping me, one with MS and one with arthritis. They were my volunteers. And they were there 3 days a week for about 4 or 5 years until I moved out of state. Those 2 people, Duke and Leo, were my volunteers. But anyway, so Lonnie said to me, I want you to come to the nursing home because I really think that I can walk, but I want you to be there when I take my first steps. So we made arrangements at a time when the free clinic was not happening, and I went there with my camera, and I took a picture of him, and they had a walker in front of him, so he was able to hold on to the walker, and then he was able to lift himself up without any help, and I sat on the floor sobbing, watching him. I'm getting the chills. I know when I get the chills, it's really an important discussion topic for me. And I watched him take his first steps. It was almost like watching a child take their first steps. He hadn't been able to walk in probably 15 years. And so, he was one of my miracles. So I have a book out there that people can ask their library to borrow it on an interlibrary loan. It's called Be in Balance, because it's super expensive on Amazon. So it's like $100. So I don't want, and most people who aren't well, don't have the $100 to spend. So what you can do is you can go to your library and ask them to order it on interlibrary loan. And I give everybody listening to this permission to Xerox my book. And Lonnie's story is on the back cover of the book and at the beginning of the book. I think it's even there before you get to the table of contents. And somebody actually drew a picture of him in his wheelchair holding a tweezer with a bee on it before he walked. The person actually took a photograph of him and then drew a picture, and that is in my book. So, okay. So I believe that all sickness is really homesickness. Again, going back to the Wizard of Oz, we're just trying to find our way home again. And part of that involves befriending our symptoms. And, the whole idea of making a medicine out of the illness itself is, imagine, that feeling like, well, if you can't walk, you might not be able to do it now, but you probably remember what it was like when you were able to walk and you had a pebble in your shoe and you're walking like, let's say, a mile to get home, and you've got that pebble in your shoe, and there's, really probably would be a good idea to maybe sit on a bench and take that pebble out so you don't have to have that irritant there. But when you have a symptom, it's not so easy just to take a pebble out of your shoe, right? So an example of a situation where you can't take the pebble out of the shoe is when a grain of sand gets into an oyster. That oyster can't get rid of that grain of sand. But what it does is it sends a luster, it sends material to kind of cover up that grain of sand. Now, we're not talking about suppressing symptoms or putting a Band-Aid on a symptom, but it does something magical where it covers up that little grain of sand, and eventually that grain of sand turns into a pearl. That's what I mean by making a medicine out of the illness itself. It's like you take the very thing that's at the heart of the problem and you see if you can flip it by using the bees or anything else you can find. Whatever it is, stem cell research, whatever works for you, I say go for it, So the nice thing about bees is that they're not very expensive, and they're about 10 cents a bee, and you pay for shipping. And I think, that Catherine will be able to post the websites of the people. There are two companies right now that they go out of their way. They have hives that are just used for this treatment, and then they ship in little boxes. They ship the bees to you every week or every 2 weeks, depending on how many you order. Okay, so what we're going to do is, again, going back to fairy tales or nursery rhymes, okay? Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again, but the bees can. The bees can help you put, it's like everybody's a puzzle. So everybody's going to be a little different, So I might have a general protocol, but then you have to tweak it for each person. So if someone has a really big scar, we have to go there fairly early in treatment, if we can, because scars block energy. So a scar might, let's say you took some medicine that was supposed to help with, the pain that you were having, but that scar is still there. You haven't done anything, to unblock the scar. And there's something else that's in my book, Be in Balance, and some of my other books as well that are less expensive, that the idea of, they're called major blocks. There are certain blocks. The internal dragons is when something, like when you're stuck in an emotion, like fear or anger or grief. You could even be stuck in joy, which isn't a bad thing. It's just, if you're stuck and that's the only emotion you can feel, you will say, I just feel stuck, Then there's the external dragons when something comes at you from the outside, like if you fell down a flight of stairs or fell off a horse or slipped on the ice, or, that's something that's not you that came at you from the outside. So when you hit the ground, if you fall down a flight of stairs, every single stair you're hitting it's your back or your body that's hitting it, but it's something that's not you that's coming at you from the outside. So sometimes the internal, external dragons can turn into each other. So let's say if you fell down a flight of stairs, that would be the external dragons. But if then you're stuck in fear because of stairs and you don't want to climb stairs because you had a bad experience with stairs, then you need to do the internal dragons. So all of this is in my book, Be in Balance. And also for much less money, for $25, have a workbook, and it's all in that workbook. So we'll make sure that you get the information. And then there's some other blocks. There's one called Aggressive Energy, where you're, for whatever reason, not meaning to, you're self-sabotaging somehow. You're sabotaging yourself. So some people have ailments where the body's attacking itself for some reason. So that's an example of MS. Many people feel that with MS, the straight medical version of MS, if you don't look outside the box and think it could be Lyme disease, a manifestation of Lyme or something else. But let's look at the sort of the Western medicine approach to MS. They're saying that it's an autoimmune disease. The body's attacking itself, right? And what it's attacking is the myelin sheath. And so the myelin sheath is sort of like the rubber that's around some wires that you're going to plug in to turn on your TV or even your cell phone if you want to charge up your cell phone or your computer. You're not going to be holding onto live wires. And so what happens with MS is that that myelin sheath is sort of the equivalent of sort of the rubber. Now we're going where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, but it's like the rubber that's around the wire that you're plugging into the wall. So if the brain wants to send signals down to the foot to walk properly and have good balance and be able to get up from a chair and walk to the bathroom or to walk to bed or to go someplace, to go to the refrigerator to get something to eat, if the brain can't get the signal down to the feet because the myelin sheath has been destroyed or is severely damaged, then you can't walk there. You can't walk to the refrigerator to get what you need. So I can't promise you that Bee Venom is going to help you regenerate the myelin sheath. But what I can promise you is that the apimin, one of the ingredients in Bee Venom, actually crosses the blood-brain barrier. It's small enough. Not all the ingredients in Bee Venom are small enough to cross the blood-brain barrier. But apimin can cross the blood-brain barrier, and what it does is it improves the conductivity of the nerves, even without the myelin sheath being there. Okay? So that's the good news, that all of a sudden you get stung by bees and then your brain can send the signal down to your foot or send a signal to your hands or your fingers, and you can open a jar, you can walk to the refrigerator or walk to the bathroom. That's pretty miraculous, I would say. So that's the key component for MS patients that makes the biggest difference with Bee Venom. And it's not in yellow jackets or wasp venom at all. So that's why we only use honeybees. And also the venom is not as intense and it's easier to handle for a period of time, But apimin is very, very important for any kind of brain injury, anything to do with the nervous system. So it could even be related to pain or restless leg syndrome, neuropathy, anything that's related to nerves. Now, the nerves come out of the spine, right? So they come out of the spinal cord, all right? And they go to your extremities or your organs. And so that's why I always start at the beginning stinging fairly close to the spine. First of all, it's good to sting on the back because at the beginning, your body may have a strong reaction, which means that it might get red and it might swell a lot. So the back gives you a very large area for swelling to spread out. Whereas if your first bee sting is on your finger and it swells, the first thing you have to do, if you get a bee sting on your hand, you have to take off all your rings, you have to take off your watch, because your whole hand might swell up. And that happened to me. So I can speak from experience. I got some accidental stings. I didn't do it on purpose. And I think I mentioned it last time. I got stung by dead bees. Actually, dead bees can still sting you. And I got stung on my palm. So I immediately took off all my rings and my watch. But I always start on the back, and I start usually, about an inch or two from the spine, so I can try to catch some of those nerves. So if someone with MS, if we're going to focus on MS for a minute, someone with MS is mostly having trouble from the waist down, whether it's bladder issues, whether it's they can't walk, so they're in a wheelchair, or they have neuropathy, or they have foot drop, or something like that. You want to start stinging from the waist down. So stinging starting around the waist. Whereas if you're having mostly MS symptoms in the upper part of your body, what happens is that you want to sting from the waist up. And the higher up you go, I don't recommend doing the neck too early, but the higher up you go, the more the nerves will be going to your arms, your hands, and your fingers. So that's the difference in terms of with MS. Now, if you have symptoms all over the place with MS, then you really could go anywhere. You could start in the mid-back and then alternate, sometimes go a little bit above the waist, sometimes go a little bit below, and just kind of see how you do. And generally speaking, I try, I tend to sting like 2 stings, 3 sessions, it's 3 times a week. So let's say Monday, Wednesday, Friday, just 2 stings. So we're not rushing here. We're not trying to get to, 10 stings or 20 stings or something in the first week. It's not, we're not trying to create a diamond here, where we're, really rushing and, trying to reach a lot of people in a very quick amount of time. What we're doing here is we're creating a pearl. And what a pearl is going to do is we're being very consistent. We're going to be, it's really, in a sense, not a race. It's like the difference between, although we talked about pulling a rabbit out of a hat, when it comes to how many stings to do, we're going to be the turtle. We're going to be slow. We're going to be methodical. And we're going to start with 2 stings. If that feels like too much, we do 1 sting. And you could even stay at 1 sting 3 times a week for a month. Or if you're doing okay, you could go up by, like, let's say in your second week, you could try 2 stings 3 times that week and see how you do. But if you tried 2 stings and you did okay with that, you could, after you do it 3 times, you could jump up to 4 stings, or you could go to 3. In other words, you can mix and match. It's almost like a Chinese restaurant, really. It's like a little bit from column A and column B. So everybody's going to be different. Some people can handle 2 bee stings, no problem. Other people, 2 stings feels like too much. So then they need to be at 1 sting. And, you're going to be doing this for a while. I mean, unless you're one of those miracle cases, that you only need 2 stings and you aren't blind anymore. And that was your main goal, was to be able to see, and she didn't have to keep stinging to remain sighted. So, which is pretty exciting. But basically, we're going very slowly. So, okay, so that's sort of my introductory remarks. Even though we have a bit of MS. So There's another thing I want to talk about, which is part of the magic trick. Remember we said that apimin helps the conductivity of, so the brain can communicate with the arms and legs, hands and feet, fingers and toes, okay, and all the different organs. But there's another piece to the magic trick with MS and any autoimmune disease. In other words, where the body's attacking itself. I think I got on that topic because I was talking about the major blocks, aggressive energy, when the body's sort of self-sabotaging, it's sort of attacking itself. And that could actually also be for cancer as well. I know we didn't say we were going to talk about cancer, but that particular treatment for aggressive energy is a good treatment for cancer because, in a sense, someone with cancer is not recognizing that there's something foreign there, and the body's not attacking itself in that case, and the body needs to attack itself. So we have to wake the body up. We have to wake up the immune system. But anyway, with MS or any autoimmune disease, whether it's an ulcer, lupus, any kind of chronic fatigue, whatever it is, fibromyalgia, where if the body's attacking itself in some way, and you sting the body with a honeybee, now you have an emergency because venom is a poison, right? So the body has to rush and it has to stimulate the adrenal glands to either, most of the time is to produce cortisol because a lot of times the body doesn't have enough cortisol, but if the body has too much, then it regulates it. But let's assume many MS patients don't have enough cortisol. So they have adrenal insufficiency kind of conditions. So the venom stimulates the body to produce, let's say in this case, cortisol. Then the body sends heat to the area where you've been stung to break down the bee venom. And it sends fluid to the area. We talked about this last time. Those are the two ways, the only two ways the body can break down that bee venom is heat and fluid. So dilution and heat. Bee venom stays in the body for 48 hours. So during that 48 hours, the body is so focused on breaking down that bee venom that it's not breaking down the myelin sheath or attacking the stomach lining or whatever it was doing before there was an autoimmune disease. So this is so wonderful for people, or maybe people who have pain. Maybe their nerves are firing constantly, and you want to shut those nerves, calm them down, okay? If that bee venom is in there, the body has to focus on the bee venom, and it's going to let go of stimulating those nerve firings. And that's why it looks like the pain is disappearing, right? But what's happening is the body's just focusing on something else. And as an afterthought, the body cleans up anything else that's underneath the surface that's there. So I call it the decoy effect. And not that I'm not a hunter, but I guess people who go out hunting for ducks, I really don't think that people hunting for deer do this, but people hunting for geese or ducks, if you're shooting a gun into the air, sometimes what you'll do is you'll put a decoy, a duck, in the water, and sometimes then the geese will come down and float on the water to join that decoy duck that's there. And people make a living carving decoy ducks out of wood, It's a whole industry, cottage industry of people. So what we're doing is we're actually tricking the body, we're manipulating the body to break down the bee venom. And while the body's doing that, so it's like, you see, that's why I say it's a magic trick. It's like a decoy. It's focusing on the bee venom, and during that time, it's not breaking down the myelin sheath or it's not, the body's not firing off all those nerve endings that are creating the pain, because the body's now focused on an emergency. So last week we talked about, in homeopathy, you can't cure anything that's chronic. You have to make it acute. So what we're doing is we're bringing up a chronic condition to an acute level, because now when you're stung by a bee, it could be an emergency. I mean, theoretically, somebody could die. I've never used an EpiPen in my 23 years. I don't know. It just seems that the people who come to me, I'm also very cautious because I have a license to lose, So I'm really cautious. But so I'm very methodical. I'm very careful. I do, in this case, less is more. So I'm not in a big rush to sting people many, many times, because especially at the beginning, you want to get people used to the venom. And every time you go, like, I wouldn't start just because somebody has, a problem with their leg. I would not start on the leg. I'll always start on the back. I might start from the waist, start at the waist, and then start, creeping down a little bit, because you can actually get to your leg by getting to the nerves that leave the spinal column and go down to the legs, the knees, the feet, the toes and all that. So it's not that we're not focusing on maybe where you think your symptoms are, but we're doing it safely by staying on the trunk of the body for the first, I would say, at least 2 to 3 months is where I usually, like the torso, when I say the trunk of the body. In other words, not the legs and below, not the neck or the head generally, not, you could sting maybe the shoulder, but I wouldn't start like doing the, going all the way down, doing 10 stings all the way down your arm. I definitely wouldn't do that. And when I start to do the extremities, I creep. When I mean creep, I mean I do a testing and let the body just get used to one testing per session, going down the arm. So let me just see here for MS if I left anything out. I did mention at the beginning that I've had some people crawl into my house and walk out. And sometimes you actually visually see somebody doing the crawling. And I think last time I mentioned that I just saw somebody sitting on a chair and he was wearing shorts and his knees were black. And I asked him, how come your knees are so black? And he said, because he crawled from his car into my house up the ramp. And so we developed a system we called McBee's, which was that if people couldn't get out of the car, that they would drive up to the house, pull in the driveway or park right in the front and honk their horn. And I would look out the window, see who it was, know how many stings they usually got. And I would run out there with the tweezers in both hands. And I would run out there and I would sting them. And then 20 minutes later, they would honk their horn. Meanwhile, I might have treated 5 other people when I was back in my own living room or dining room. And then I'd run out and take the stingers out. So it was an amazing time in my life, that free clinic, those first 5 years when it was my learning curve. It was my initiation. It was really an experience. And it was the people's medicine. It was, to me, bee medicine or bee magic, believe, to be able to believe in something, to believe, to trust, to take your own health back into your own hands. Some people got to the point where they didn't want to keep coming to my house anymore, so they just would send somebody over. I had 4 hives outside, and people would come, and they would just bring their own jar, and they would get bees out of the jar. They fill up their jar, and they would go home, and they would, let's say a father would do that for their daughter, and then the father would go home and sting his daughter. As long as this is making me think about a particular patient named was Karen, and she had MS. by the way, one of my patients used to say, I may have MS, but MS doesn't have me. And I love that. I get the chills now thinking about that woman who said that, one of my patients, because she wasn't going to, and she wrote poetry and she gave me a book of her poems. But Doris was her name. And anyway, that patient whose father came and got the bees for her, she was on prednisone. And eventually she came off it. But I want to say to those people out there who have MS, who are on beta-seron, any MS drugs, any prednisone, I mean, you can be on medicine. I mean, I've stung people on methadone. You know, I'm not afraid, except for beta blockers. And it's not that a beta blocker is going to interfere poorly with bee venom. It's just that the EpiPen won't work if you're on a beta blocker. So if somebody has a pacemaker, the EpiPen may not work. They still may do very well with the bees, but to me, that's very scary. And the other scary thing is alcohol. So I say to people, it's one of my cardinal rules. It's in the book. And if you go to my website, it's up there in the protocol, that you can't have any alcoholic beverages 24 hours before being stung. And my mentor, Charlie Mraz, who kept Bee Venon Therapy alive for 60 years after his mentor died and before Charlie himself died in 1999, he kept Bee Venom alive for about 60 years after his mentor died in the 1940s. So he's like the king of Bee Venom Therapy, and he wrote, he was really, I met him when he was 89 years old, and he lived another 10 years. He actually asked me to marry him, but that's a story for another day. But I truly loved him in a way that you love a mentor and somebody who you really care about and who you've learned from and who's your teacher, you know. So I really do owe a lot to him, so I may as well be giving him some credit today, as long as we're talking about bees. But he basically started off just stinging chronic pain and arthritis. That was his main thing that he was doing for 60 years. Now, the truth is, what most people don't know, although it's in his book, Health and the Honeybee, which he wrote when he was in his 90s with the help of a friend. Basically, he was getting, I'm not really big on experimenting on animals, but this is something that he chose to do. He had a friend who worked at Sloan Kettering, and they had mice that had been injected with cancer cells, testicular cancer. So we're looking at male mice, boy mice, and so what he did was he stung them with bees, and when he returned those mice back to Sloan Kettering, they had no cancer. So, I'm getting the chills. So we're talking about probably in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and kind of that era. He was doing those things before it was, popular. Last time we mentioned they're doing some, studies in test tubes they're taking an ingredient out of bee venom called melatonin, and they're taking that melatonin, attaching it onto a nanoparticle, so they're calling it nano bees, and then they're injecting it like into a test tube full of cancer cells and maybe some healthy cells too, and the cancer cells are sort of fall apart and the healthy cells are left intact. And they're doing the same thing with HIV. It basically kills, the melatonin is killing HIV in test tubes. And there's, for anybody listening who has Lyme disease or has a friend who has Lyme disease, in 1997, there was a study, albeit in a test tube or on a slide, visible on a microscope, but melatonin in Bee Venom actually destroys the Lyme spirochete, which is pretty amazing. So unfortunately, the government hasn't chosen to put a lot of money into research on some of these things, like I would wish. But when I win my lottery, when I become a multimillionaire, I will, although I feel like $1 million, inside myself, but when I have the money, I will donate the money to research for all these illnesses that are being ignored. Okay, so let's see, did I forget anything in the MS column? I don't think so. So if we talk about chronic pain, and this would be true for MS2 or any chronic ailment, remember scars block energy. So if you've got scars, you can start with testings just to see how they respond. But again, if it's on your knee, you're not going to go there right away, right? Even if somebody were coming to me with knee pain, okay, I would still start on the back. Now, in the old days, I did go to the knee, as we talked about last week. But now I'm a lot more cautious. And some people, their knee might just blow up, and I don't want them to get discouraged. So I start in an area where, the venom has a place to expand. So, so you're going to be starting on the back no matter what ailment, whether you have migraine headaches, no matter what's going on, you're really pretty much with me. You're starting, that's my protocol. I mean, if you're doing somebody else's protocol, might end up differently, but I wouldn't recommend it because I've been there, done that, and I made all the mistakes, and I don't want you to if you want to make your own mistakes, that's fine, but I don't want you to make the mistakes that I made. So that's why if you're reading my protocol, you won't make the mistakes that I made at the beginning, because it's a learning curve, just like everything is a learning curve. So we learn more from our, quote, mistakes than or our, quote, failures. And I'm using quotes because, they're like challenges. We learn a lot, or maybe more from our challenges, maybe than just something that was easy, that was a success. You're born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You never learn how to, earn a living, because you didn't have to learn because you were a trust fund baby or something. So, but you still, if you have $1 million but you don't have your health, then, the bees can help you there. So, eventually, once your body's gotten used to the venom and let's say you do have a problem with your knee and you really want to go there, you could creep your way down one testing per session and eventually get to your knee. And once you've done a testing on your knee and you feel like you're doing okay, you could do a real sting, which means leaving it in 20 minutes and being, of course, very careful how you take the stinger out. You slide the stinger along the skin, parallel to the skin, because honeybees have a lot of barbs on their stingers. So if you pull the stinger straight up into the air, like that, then part of that stinger could stay inside the body. It's not the end of the world, but I prefer that not happen, because you could get sort of like a splinter. You could get like a little pus. You could get a little, a little irritation, infection or something. And there's no need for it if you learn how to. And I have videos, I think, that I've given you, Catherine, that show how to take the stinger out properly. So everybody here who's listening is going to have everything that they need at their fingertips. And if you can see, you'll be able to, see what I'm saying. Or if you can't see, then you'll be able to hear what I'm saying. So, okay, so let's see. I'm just checking my notes just to be absolutely sure that I haven't left anything out. Oh, yeah. you wanted to know last time what are some of the ingredients, and we focused last time on apimin, which we just discussed, and melatonin, which I just alluded to, which is especially good for like HIV and Lyme and cancer. But really, all of the ingredients in bee venom are anti-inflammatory. So if you have an inflammatory condition, then the bee venom is going to calm it down. But adolapin is one of the main ingredients I want to just touch on for chronic pain. Adolapin, apimin, and melatonin combined, basically you're going to get at least 100 times more powerful than a cortisone shot. And that's just with one bee sting. So bee venom is, let's see if I can get all the things. I mean, it's good for so many things, but they start with antimicrobial, antibacterial, antiviral, anti-inflammatory, anti-parasitic, antifungal. So it sounds like sounds like it's against something, but it's against something that you want to get rid of, so it just seems like Charlie used to say, it's not a magic bullet. I mean, because otherwise just like one bee sting, or if you could just take a pill, I mean, I'm sure people would much prefer than to be stung by bees to just take a pill that had bee venom in it. Unfortunately, the enzymes in the stomach acid is going to destroy all the qualities of the bee venom. That's why it's not going to work. So it's like, I think I said this last time, but the metaphor is coming back. So it's like Coca-Cola. Remember when they changed the formula? I don't drink Coca-Cola, but some people liked the real thing. Or was it Pepsi? But anyway, one of them changed the formula, and people rebelled. And they said, we want the original formula back. So, the bee venom itself is really, it's the real thing. It's, you don't want to go into a laboratory and be fooling around with bee venom and taking the components apart, and just only using melatonin or just only using apimin, because that's not the way God or the universe created the honeybee. And the honeybee has not changed in over 30 million years. It was around during the dinosaurs. And I will say this, actually, the oldest bee on the planet, I don't think I said this last time, the oldest bee on the planet was, it's kind of like you find fossils and things like that. The oldest bee on the planet was found in amber, which is my name. And I wasn't born with this name. I chose the name Amber long before I got into the bees. And I was working on writing my book, Bee in Balance, and I discovered that the patron saint for beekeeping is Saint Ambrose, which is about the closest thing you can get to Amber Rose. So it's not that I'm saying I'm a saint, but that it's almost like I grew into my name. It's like I had like a destiny that, I always knew that I wanted to be a medicine woman. I wanted to heal people with my own tears because, like as a wounded healer, you want to help other people. So, but in my wildest dreams, I was just looking through some beekeeping magazines, and in one of the little corners it said, oh, the patron saint for beekeeping is St. Ambrose. And I found out there are many more patron saints, and one is St. Valentine's, which is kind of nice too, because that's about love. But for me, it's like I do feel like I'm a medicine woman, that I'm doing bee medicine, that it's magical. And I know last time we talked about, I don't know if you want me to repeat what I said last time about the fact that, the bees will die within 2 to 3 days after you sting them, because Not so much with yellow jackets or wasps. They could sting you thousands of times and not die. What's the difference? Well, a honeybee has all those barbs that we talked about. And so what happens is when you get stung by a honeybee and then she flies away, okay, she leaves her stinger in you. And her intestines, oh, by the way, all the bees with stingers, they're all females. A beehive is basically like a matriarchal society. They're like maybe, like when I had hives, I had like 120,000 bees in every hive that I had. Nowadays, with colony collapse, I hear people, you're lucky if you have like 50 or 60,000 bees in a hive. But even with that, there are only maybe 300 male bees, drones, in a hive. And all the rest are female. And the queen is the only one that's fertile. And how she's becomes fertile is she goes on a honeymoon flight. That's where the word honeymoon comes from. She goes on a flight and all the drones follow her. They used to think that she was inseminated by just one drone and the others didn't matter. But now they think that scientists believe that that the queen bee is inseminated by many drones. And then she comes back to the hive after her honeymoon flight. And then she's able to create little baby bees. So speaking of babies, I'm just going to say that actually bee venom is very good for infertility. And so we call that babies, baby bees and babies. So I've had a number of people in my Lyme group that had some friends who they would write to me and say, I have somebody who's trying to get pregnant and they've been trying for 4 years and where would you recommend they sting? And I say, well, below the belly button in the front and below the waist in the back. And within a few months, they're pregnant. So I even had one person get pregnant on birth controls. I don't think she was that happy. It was an MS patient. I don't think she was too happy about that. So let me just see. I'm gonna cheat now, and I'm gonna put on my glasses because I've been trying to do this without my glasses. So, but at least I have the lights on, which I didn't have last time. So let me just see if I left anything out. Yeah, there are a couple of things. Okay. All right, so not too many though. All right, so we were talking about saints. So I just want to bring up another saint. Catherine of Siena. Oh, interesting, your name is Catherine, but I think she spelled hers with a C. Catherine of Siena said, probably her most famous quote, most famous line, or at least the one I like the most, is, all the way to heaven is heaven. That's what I mean about befriending your symptoms, being at peace with where you are now, which doesn't mean you have to stay there. You can still grow, just like you plant a seed and the seed grows, but you don't want to keep pulling the carrot, out of the ground, because otherwise you could have a really tiny, tiny carrot, but so you have to have patience. But all the way to heaven is heaven. So that was something I didn't want to forget to say. In Chinese medicine, me being an acupuncturist, in Chinese medicine, there are 5 elements if you look out in nature. And each of them has a color that goes with them, a season, sound of the voice, an emotion. There are a lot of different manifestations. A lot of people say that people with MS are kind of a combination of fire and water. And how you know that is around the eye. Sometimes you see like a little bit of, if you don't stare, but if you look at them sort of almost sideways a little bit, or just turn your head and then look back, you'll see kind of a reddish, almost like they maybe were crying. Or there's like a dark, when people have really dark circles around their eyes. So sometimes that is a little bit of a tip-off with MS, but it's not always true. Sometimes people say that MS stands for measles, like people had a high fever in childhood, which would be the fire element, because it's high fever, and that's where the redness would come from. So measles, beginning with M and ending with S, that's where the MS comes from. I don't know if it's true, but a lot of people with MS said that they did have high fevers in childhood and they had measles, although a lot of us had measles when we were kids, so before they had vaccinations. And I'm not really big on vaccinations, but I think a lot of us, I remember having the German measles too. So, but anyway, so I hadn't mentioned that. Let's see. Oh yeah. So in Chinese medicine, there are 5 elements. So you have fire, earth. Fire is red, earth is yellow. Then you have what we call air or metal. So like the air that we breathe, or metal in the ground, like diamonds or rubies or emeralds or tin or silver or gold, and that color is white. And then you have the water element, which is blue, and then you have the wood element, which is green. So those are the colors. And so there are different associations that go with each element. So what I'm just sort of coming to my conclusion now, Catherine, so don't be too worried about the time in case we're a little pressed for time, but I'm sort of winding down here, even though it sounds like I'm revving up, because I'm very passionate about this subject. So I imagine every patient or every person that I meet as a desert. And I think to myself, what could I bring to a desert that would make the biggest difference? Because bee venom is going to be that ingredient that we're going to use, but from an acupuncture standpoint. So if I brought, let's say, wood, like trees and plants, to a desert, it really wouldn't change very much. They wouldn't survive unless they were cactus or something. But even some deserts, cactuses, they don't survive. So that would be the wood element. So let's say I tried bringing fire. If I brought fire to a desert, it would be like making it more hot. It would probably maybe make it worse, If I brought earth, if I took a dump truck and dumped a whole bunch of earth onto a desert, and if the desert was made of sand, let's say, I don't think it would really make that big of a difference. If I brought gold and rubies and diamonds, which is the metal element, or another way of saying it is air, if I brought air to the desert, it really wouldn't change anything. But if I brought water to a desert, it would change everything. So I'm getting the chill. So each person, I have to figure out which element is what they need. And so once, when I'm doing acupuncture, I can go anywhere I want on the body fairly quickly. But with the bees, we're starting on the back or maybe the abdomen if we're going to do some bladder stings in the pubic area. But for the most part, for the first few months, we're staying on the back. But then where do you go after the back, you see? And so that's when it comes in. And here's a little secret tip. Here's me pulling the rabbit out of a hat. But it took me, I've been an acupuncturist for over 30 years. So, okay. So here are 5 basic questions that help you figure out which element you want to focus on first. So I say, and I'll just say it to you, Catherine, because I don't know who else is going to be listening. So Catherine, I'm going to give you a choice of 5 things. And I want you to tell me which of the 5 is the most important thing to you that you wouldn't want to live without. You might want all 5, but if you could only choose one, which one is the most important to you? So the first choice is number one is unconditional love. The second choice is being understood. The third choice is feeling respected, appreciated, and special. The fourth choice is being reassured that everything's going to be okay. And the last choice, number 5, is having a plan and a sense of direction. Now, these are in my workbook. These questions are in my workbook, but I can write them out for you if you need them. So for me, I would choose number 2, which is being understood. Because if somebody says, I love you, but I don't understand why you feel that way, then I don't feel loved. So for me, being understood, which is the yellow part, is the earth element, you see, that's the equivalent of my water to the desert. You know, so not everybody needs water. So you have to kind of figure out what they need, because you want to give them what they need, not what you think they need, but what they need. So patients, people will tell you in 1,000 ways what they need, and they'll also disguise it in 1,000 ways. So you have to be able to read the clues, get the signs, listen to the sound of the voice, you know, so there are all kinds of, so my workbook actually is much more updated than the Be in Balance, and that book is only $25. But I mean, a group of people could chip in and get that one book, and you can Xerox it. I mean, it's, for me, it's not about the money. It's just about getting the information out there. So once you've stung the back, and you might decide, and you've stung your scars, and maybe you've done the internal, external dragons. I'll never forget, actually, an MS patient in a wheelchair. I don't remember her name at the moment. After 60,000 patients, after a while, I can, Carol, I can picture her. And I did the internal dragons treatment on her. And it involves 7 bee stings or 7 needles. And the next time she came back, she told me she felt she had a cloak of serenity wrapped around her. So I know when I get the chills that, you know, each of these stories, I have so many stories, just depends on which kind of comes to mind at the moment. But she's a perfect example. But you see, that particular treatment involves stinging. There are 2 points on the thigh, 1 point on each thigh, and 1 point near each ankle. So I had to wait a good 3 months, and I had to creep down there in order to do it. So it's not like you can rush these treatments. I mean, unless you're doing acupuncture. But if you're using bees, you know, you have to creep down slowly. And once you've crept down to the ankle, then you could do the internal dragons treatment. So maybe I'll just, unless, do you have any questions, or? Oh, you're muted.
My only question, I think I already figured out the answer to. I was going to ask if, you know, how in reflexology, pretty much your whole body is there on your foot or even your hand, even your
You're right.
but those little extremities. So I was going to ask if you could sting in those areas instead, but it sounds like there might be too much of a reaction for those areas.
I think it would be too strong, but you could do them after you finally crept down there. Then you could do them, but until then, you could do acupressure on those points. Mm-hmm. You could do reflexology. You know, you could, I mean, there's so many things you can do, crystals and, you know, all kinds of things, and put your intention that you want to work on a certain organ or a certain leg or you know, something like that, but, or your nervous system or your spine. By the way, the spine and the kidneys and the brain and the adrenal glands, which sit on the kidneys, the Chinese thought they were all one organ. The Chinese didn't do dissection. They didn't open up, they didn't do autopsies. They didn't open up the body, and the acupuncture meridians are not, if you opened up the body, you wouldn't see them anyway. But they were aware that they had a sense that there were organs inside the body, and they thought that the kidneys and the spine and the brain all went together. So if you're actually doing some stings where the nerves go to the kidneys, you're actually treating the spine and the brain at the same time. So it's really quite fascinating. And you actually can, I mean, if you've had a spinal injury, you can actually sting on the spine itself, like in the intervertebral process, not like directly on the bone. If it happened by accident, it's not the end of the world, but I would sting, in the spaces between the bones, just to try to make it simple for people. But in general, we tend to sting like right next to the spine because that's where kind of the nerves are coming out. But there are some points that are in between the vertebrae, and there's a whole meridian that starts at the tailbone and goes all the way up the whole back of the spine, up the head, and exits right here in the frenulum. And I wouldn't sting inside the mouth, but that's just me. But so being able to look at the acupuncture charts and kind of seeing, where the meridians are, you might get some clues of where you might want to sting if you want to focus. And so my workbook probably has, and it's the least expensive book. I don't know if you could get it in the libraries easily because it's only been out about a year, a little over a year. But Be in Balance has all the pictures, but the workbook has more of these questions that I just asked, the 5 questions. And you go through the workbook. Also, Be in Balance too. You can go through it and you circle where you struggle and where you're strong. Because usually where you're strong or where you struggle is also where you're strong. It's like the flip side of the coin. So if you can flip it, you can make a medicine out of the illness itself. So basically what they say, if you're looking at fear, the opposite maybe would be courage or faith. So what they say is faith is fear that has said its prayers. Or if fear knocks on a door and faith answers, then nobody's home. In other words, the fear disappears, because if you can flip it into its opposite. So everything has the possibility of turning into its opposite. And I will absolutely close here with a wonderful quote that I forgot to do last time. So I'm so glad that I get to end today with this quote from a Spanish poet named Antonio Machado. And there are different translations, but this is my favorite. Last night I dreamed, O marvelous one, that honeybees were in my heart, making honey out of my old failures.
Very beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you for coming back and being with us again. And I'm sure we'll have you back even again, because there's just so much that we could talk about on this. And I appreciate you covering these subjects, because I do have a friend with MS, and of course I have pain. So we're looking for ways to deal with these issues. And it's just, I'm just always amazed at how God has provided us basically with cures in so many different ways. The C word, I know, but treatments.
Well, it's really God's medicine is how I look at it. It's like, actually, I'm an interfaith minister. And one of the reasons that I became an interfaith minister was I didn't want the government to ever be able to take away my ability to sting people with honeybees.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that if I created some kind of a chapel called the Interfaith Honeybee Chapel or Sacred Bee Chapel, something where it's almost like peyote is for Native Americans, where the government allows Native Americans to use peyote on the reservation and all, that maybe if I were able to, so I actually went to school to become an interfaith minister, got my PhD, so I'm a reverend. I can marry people. I haven't done any funerals, but I've married a lot of people. And but I did it because I really didn't want them to take the bees away from me. I never want, and you know, I'm just saying this out loud. I'm not anticipating this, but I believe in this so much that I'd be willing to go to jail. I don't anticipate that will happen because I've never charged, and I tend not to use the C word, but I will say that I've seen people, not necessarily, I wouldn't even use the word remission. I've seen people be in recovery, which is a good 12-step word. And I have 12, I'm sorry, there's a train going by, if you can hear it.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that train, but maybe it's time for us to get on that B train and I'm willing to, if there are enough people, and if I can just get my airfare paid for, I can fly anywhere and just give a seminar on it if there are enough people that want to get stung. And actually that's what happened. Some of the videos that you'll make available to people, the ones from Florida, there are 4 videos from Florida and they're each an hour and a half long, but they paid for my plane flight. And then I gave a speech on a Friday night, and I did an all-day workshop on Saturday. And so all of that is covered.
Nice.
So
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely God's medicine. And I think the Chinese were onto something, connecting the spine and the brain and the kidneys and the adrenal glands. And it's interesting because I have a spinal cord birth defect, and I never understood, even going through nursing school, for some reason I missed it somehow, but I never, I can't take calcium. I've never been able to take any form of calcium. I can eat foods that have calcium in them, greens. I don't do dairy. I can't say I'm vegan. I found out because I wear leather, but I respect the animal spirit and that they gave their skin to save my life. So that's where I go with that. But I never thought about the adrenals and the parathyroid combination with the calcium absorption. And I have a lot of calcium deposits in the form of spurs all the way down my spine, and my SI joints are growing together and stuff like that. And it's a misuse of calcium in my body. And when I try to take calcium, like maybe an oyster shell calcium or something like that, I feel like I have been severely beaten with a bat. I mean, I can't even get out of bed. It almost immobilizes me in pain. And so there is a connection there somehow. Like my kidneys, I have a big vessel actually missing in my brain and my head. And then when you go down, I have the spinal cord birth defect. And then the kidneys, I have, there's a part of my kidneys that are supposed to be on the inside that's actually on the outside. So it's just another part of that midline birth defect, supposedly caused by lack of folic acid, I guess, and when women are pregnant, because when they started supplementing with folic acid, I cut down a lot on this particular birth defect. And of course, now we know every prenatal vitamin has folic acid in it. But it's really interesting the way that things are connected. The different parts of the body are connected that you don't necessarily think about connecting. Like the pelvis and the neck are connected, and which is really odd. I know that I've experienced when I was raped when I was 12, and my neck was broken at the same time. So to get like an injury at both places at the same time, and then
Wow.
find many years down the road that they're connected energetically as well, it's been very curious and interesting to look at the symbolism and the connection.
One thing that I think you'll find fascinating is that if someone is born, like I was born with a hiatal hernia, passed down from my grandmother to my mother to me, and some other intestinal things that I had a retrocecal appendix, which my father happened to have that. And I almost died because they said, oh, it's not your appendix, and my father almost died, but he was able to say, listen, my daughter had a retrocecal appendix. So, but where I'm going with this is that when you are born with a genetic issue, in other words, from birth, you were born that way. Some people are born with two spleens, I mean, it could be anything. Yours is in particular related to a spinal issue and something in your brain and something with your kidneys. Mm-hmm. And what's fascinating is that in Chinese medicine, if you are born with, sorry, there's sirens in the background. If you're born with some kind of a genetic issue, something from birth that you inherited, that's part of your DNA and what came together with the egg and the sperm, that goes with the kidneys. If you can believe it, that goes with the kidneys. And one more thing that you said that's fascinating is, remember I said that there's a different color and there's a different sound of the voice and there's a different season. Like winter is the water element because water freezes in the winter, so that kind of makes sense. And fire would be the summer, but there are other things that go with the water element, since you have spinal issues, kidney issues, brain issues. So one of the things that you mentioned it, and it was like I was chomping at the bit. It's like because I muted myself because I didn't want to have the echo. But I wanted just to give you a hug and say, guess what? Bones go with the water element. So bone spurs and that kind of thing, and that kind of those calcium deposits that get hardened into those like bone spurs, and teeth also go with the water element and the kidneys. So there are a lot of things that go together with each of the elements, and everything that you talked about was something that went with the kidneys, that went with the water element.
And another interesting aspect of that is, heat. Even though I have a lot of burning pain, you would think that heat would irritate me, but cold irritates me. So I don't know if I need the fire because I have too much water, something going on, and it's trying to balance there or what. But
well, and also the rape, at such a young age, would go with a heart protector, which is the pericardium. The heart sits in a sac called the pericardium, I'm sure you know. And so that's betrayal, a kind of a betrayal, an invasion of privacy. That would be the fire. That's the heart protector as part of, and the heart and the fire, in your body. So, like hot and, I don't know if you get cold hands and cold feet or things like that, but, the fire element has a lot to do with relationships and love. And I don't know which one you picked, but if you picked unconditional love as one of your 5 things, that might reflect that early injury, that early assault from something that wasn't you, that came at you from the outside. So you would probably benefit from the external dragons treatment with the bees or with acupuncture.
It's very cool. It's so interesting. It
Yeah,
is.
cool.
I've got this little book. I don't know where it is right now. It's a little tiny book, maybe this big, and it talks about just the concept of irritation in the body, and how we can irritate ourselves in so many ways, chemically or with foods or with environment, but also just with our thought processes and what we allow to, quote, rub us the wrong way. And it's just really fascinating how all of this stuff ties together. And the emotions that get stuck in the body that cause issues. And but then, like you said, you have scars and areas that actually physically block energy. And so sometimes you're dealing with that sort of thing. And you can, of course, get scars on the inside as well that you're not even seeing on the outside, right? So the human body is just amazing to me. And even, thank God, even at my worst moments, like there is such an awe, when about just the processes that go on in, say, a 30-second span of time that our bodies do automatically for us. I mean, if it were up to us to have to make our heart beat or remind ourselves to breathe 60 times a minute or whatever, we're so pitiful. We would just be dead in like less than a week, I mean, our bodies are so amazing, and they just do all this stuff automatically. And I don't know like how it all came about, but I'm pretty sure that two planets didn't collide and it all just came out this perfect. I'm pretty sure about that. I can't tell you how it happened, but yeah.
Well, what's wonderful about the bees is that it helps the body heal itself. And that's the sign of any true good healing, is you don't want to be necessarily dependent on any one thing, because then the body could get lazy. Oh, here come my bee stings, So, like, I don't have to do any work. The bees are just going to do it for me. So, but the goal of this treatment is not to keep you doing it for the rest of life, unless you want to do it as a lifestyle kind of preventive type thing. But the goal is to take your health into your own hands, so that you or somebody you love is doing it for you, and that you don't have to go to a doctor necessarily, and that the body is learning, is remembering, is waking up, like Rip Van Winkle or Sleeping Beauty was woken up with a kiss by Prince Charming. It's like we're doing it in a gentle way, although, I won't lie, those bee stings can feel hot and spicy burn. Oh, I will say this: if you eat a lot of Mexican food or something like that, hot foods, the stings hurt more. And if you eat a lot of carbohydrates, you itch more. So if, let's say, you decided you were going to treat yourself to chocolate chip cookies or something afterwards, then what happens is then it itches more.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
It's really interesting. So cool. So cool. Well, thank you again so much, Amber, and just love you. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. I know people are going to gain so much from this. And just a pleasure to be here. We've run long. Who cares? That's it. All helps people, right? So we will see you next Tuesday. I have an idea of who I'm going to have on next Tuesday, but I'm not quite for sure yet, so I won't make any announcements, but it'll be same bat channel and everything. So we'll see.
Okay, great. So it's fun to continue. So it's like a television program. It's not a soap opera, it's not a tearjerker, but it's magical and beautiful.
Thank you. As are you. Thank you so much, Amber Rose.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you so much.